to you in a moment. Every Thursday from 12 to 1 Eastern Daylight Savings Time, now that we've changed our time. Some of our international members have trouble jumping on because they don't change their time. And so we'll see people will be popping on as we go through our wonderful program today. So let me also introduce my co-chair of these roundtables, who is the chair of the same task force, but this one that deals with international different kinds of methods that we study, psychological methodology. So with the creative arts. And so we're very excited to put our two groups together as we go through these roundtables. As many of you know, you're going to be listening to us either on Zoom or on our Facebook pages. And we have both Facebook pages, COVID IPV, and the International Whole Person Approaches Facebook's pages. So please join us that way. They'll be on for at least a week or two. And we're even downloading them now to YouTube channels, and we'll start posting the links for them. We finally have been able to use the technology and figure it out. So I'm coming to you from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. You can see in my background, I really am at the beach, and it's beautiful here today. I want to introduce Dr. Giselle Gaviria. Giselle is also here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And Dr. Eric Pepper, who is coming to us from the Bay Area in San Francisco. And Brittany Geddes, who's coming to us from Pennsylvania. And I see Amy Lee has joined us, and she's also coming from the Bay Area. And we've got a very special guest. Stay tuned. Dr. Serlin is going to introduce Dr. Jorge Wang, who's really going to be very excited to hear him talk about some advocacy strategies for those of us who are really concerned about the uptake in Asian violence during COVID and during these times. So let me turn it over now to Dr. Serlin, who will then go ahead and introduce our guest. And as you all know, who have been with us before, people are going to be popping on during this hour. And Dr. Wang will spend some time talking to us, and then we'll all start talking and discussing the very important issues of the day. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Serlin.
Good morning, everyone. I'm in San Francisco. It's 9 in the morning. We're still waking up here, and it is a beautiful day here as well. And I know we're different parts of the country. Ping just got on. I'm so glad. Good morning. Also from California, we have our contingent here. And maybe that's one of the things that I was going to say when I was thinking about how to introduce Dr. Wang. First of all, I think since I'm in San Francisco, we saw a lot of the early incidents of the anti-Asian incidents going on here in San Francisco. It's very alarming. And then, of course, we started to see it all over the country. And it seemed really important to have a roundtable on it. So I thought, who's the best person to introduce this? So I was thinking about some of my early memories as eating pizza together in the basement of Mount Zion Hospital for the San Francisco Psych Association. I've known Dr. Wang since those days, and then he's become president of that and president of California Psych and council rep. Mostly, though, his dedication to the community is what's always impressed me. He's always out there doing as well as talking, and very dedicated to all the needs of the community. He and then others have been giving talks also in California for about the rise of the anti-Asian hate crimes and so forth. I also know that with limited time today, we have this latest round of shootings. These hate crimes are not separate from gender issues and health disparity issues and gun control issues and violence in the United States, lots and lots of other things. But I thought it would be a good idea, particularly today, to really focus on this aspect of how we started, which is the anti-Asian violence, because it actually has a long history in the United States and really needs to be talked about and called out on its own. So I hope that that's what we'll do today. And with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Jorge Wong.
Thank you, Dr. Sterling and Dr. Walker, for inviting me. I'm very humble to be here with you guys, this group of experts throughout the world that actually do more clinical work probably than I do. I focus primarily now on a lot of advocacy and training, but also when Aline asks to do something, I will say yes, because I know it has a very good intention, it has a major impact. So I'd like to at least share a little bit about what some of the things that I do. And I am by no way expert. I just feel that I'm just one of the many folks who gets, just kind of push the movement along, or just participate and always try to represent psychologists wherever I go. So people oftentimes forget that psychologists are people that also have social interests or have opinions about, some of the things that are happening in our community. And I believe that we need to participate and not just always be in the office all the time. So I'm going to share my screen. I do have a few slides, and then I was told that, just do a brief presentation informally, and then we will have some discussion. So I'm hoping that we'll get to accomplish that piece. So let me share my slides real quick. So I need to get here, and I'll run my PowerPoint. You should see one screen that says Health Trust 25th Anniversary, Violence and Hate Crimes Against Asian Americans.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So again, thank you for allowing me to address you guys. As you know, all these races and violence has been going on, and just last week there was a congressional hearing where the Asian American Psychological Association very quickly put together a statement to really denounce the hate, and because they're also a researcher bunch. They were able to get a lot of data from research that actually was taken from the time that the COVID pandemic hit, and the rise of a lot of the anti-Asian hate sentiments and the xenophobia, with the most recent ongoing escalations of physical violence, and particularly with elderlies. And I think that also has risen even more, in particular during the Lunar New Year time. Although traditionally it is known that there is lots of crimes against seniors during the Lunar New Year, because, as you know, giving cash or giving money as good luck, I guess prophecies for the year is very common for the elder to give to the younger individuals, for those who are married to those who are unmarried, to kind of bring them luck and prosperity. So a lot of individuals do get assaulted oftentimes, but again, on top of that, this whole COVID pandemic has escalated, and even the AAPA has pointed out that crime since the beginning of the pandemic has risen 149% across 16 cities in the United States. And there's a lot of groups, including the Black Americans, the Asians, have felt that there's like a 31% increase of racial slurs and injustices and discrimination against them. The Black Lives Movement has really catalyzed our nation to really take more active roles in not only protesting, but pushing for change in the legislation and how things are done, and be much more equitable in regards to looking at, say, healthcare, government, education. And in part to that, I think has also then spread to other groups. The last administration was quite, I guess, very negative in how they treated many of the other marginalized groups or cultural minority groups across the country. We saw, injustices with the Latino or Latinx population, the Asian, the Muslim groups, the Native American, in many different areas. So that has actually permeated for the last 4 years. And as we all know, there's a long time damage that we need to repair. And the question is, do we have hope that things can be repaired, or how long it would actually take? So this was a statement that they put out and they share with the House Judiciary Committee, and I believe it's also published. And as we know, as psychologists, and one of the things I always wonder is we're pretty good at actually putting out a lot of position papers and also statements. And sometimes I wonder, yes, we're very able to do so, but what else can we do? Can we actually make changes in the actual communities in which we reside, in which we work with individuals? We can do so oftentimes through education and trying to impart new knowledge, encourage young minds to think differently. But again, I also find that many tend to just kind of go back to just to practicing with a small kind of patient population or client population, and also doing research. So sometimes I wonder, why is it that psychologists are actually not more involved in policy making, actually large systems leadership outside of psychology? Because if we really think that we are the scientists that really understand about emotions, about cognition and behavior, why aren't we so much involved in really making significant change or impact in the large, policy, law, in things that really impact large systems? I understand that we do change one person at a time, but we can actually change systems. We can change thousands of millions at the same time. So as you know, a lot of hate crimes have happened in this, social media has actually had a huge uptick in regards to how people are responding. So through Yahoo or even like Facebook, you get a lot of information that sometimes is even faster than some of the news. And again, you need to make sure that the sources of information are correct. There's a lot of talk about the initial response from the Atlanta Police Department that this person had a bad day and this person had like a sexual addiction. And someone like me who has also worked in corrections with a lot of individuals who are in the criminal justice system with mental illness, we do know that sometimes there's premeditation as to what individuals do versus someone really being incompetent at the time of the crime to really do something that they really don't know what is right or wrong. So in looking even at the map that was published through, I guess, social media, you can see that the person, the assailant actually had to travel. So in that sense, had to actually think and plan out what he was going to be doing. Whether that is something that a sexual addiction leads someone to do and choose such a violent kind of behavior. As clinicians, we also know that oftentimes it's not necessarily just the mental illness portion of it, but it can also be other belief systems that could have been ingrained from childhood or from the social groups in which they actually exist. Um, the news also published individuals' names and age just to kind of highlight it. Oftentimes, even in professional organizations, folks are saying that, hey, let's not jump to conclusion that it is a hate crime, and let's see what the evidence show. But as social media also tries to share, um, the public or the netizens have also called them out in making sure that their information is even accurate. So in this NBC Asian American social media kind of posting or news release, kind of printed out individuals' names, and someone from the Korean American community actually called them out and basically just pointed out, hey, NBC Asian America, please correct the spelling of these names. For example, it should read Hyun Jung Grant, and Hyun Jung is the first full name. So it's also interesting that the media also tries to be responsive and also culturally respectful, competent to what they're doing, but yet they don't get the facts checked straight. And it gets up to the public to really react, not only in trying to correct them, but also containing some of the anger instead of actually just spewing all types of colorful terms. It's even got to the point where one of our local legislators, Assemblyman Evan Lowe, was taking a picture, and this is from his LinkedIn page, where he actually points out, hey, NBC, Meet the Press, maybe through your coverage of the Atlanta spa shootings, it would be helpful to have Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and especially AAPI women, speak on the hate crimes targeting our community. So he points out to the panel of experts who are there, and they don't seem to really reflect the community that was significantly impacted. So many of the impacted community, in particular the Asian American, in many circles I hear that folks are talking about us and we're not even included to really share some of our sentiments and how it really impact us in regards to our personal lives, our communities, and what we can actually do, or are they really even interested in hearing our voices? So in comparison to that, NPR is supposed to kind of provide a bit of more balanced kind of a media hearing. Actually interviewed a Asian American professor from, I forgot which university down in LA. And she also points out, she's a sociologist, and I'm like, how come there are no psychologists actually get on the public media? I do know that Dr. Evans from APA has been pretty, I guess, visual and vocal at Washington, D.C., but I'm always curious to wonder why is it our local folks that have all these expertise, and understanding too that the media oftentimes takes our words out of context, we're not more proactive in also sharing from a psychological science perspective what we know about some of the things that are happening in history, human kind of group dynamics, and how things, the minds work, and how we can actually educate the public about some of the things that are going on, given the vast knowledge base. And I was I guess surprised that with APA being such a huge publication machine, impacting lots of the publications around the world in regards to psychology, why are the members not more active in regards to reaching out to the public? I also understand that in the past, APA got rid of Psychology Today because of like a social kind of education. It wasn't academic or serious enough. But I think public opinion oftentimes carries a lot of weight, and as professionals and researchers and clinicians, we also need to take that into consideration. Um, so even here, the person, Dr. Yuan was, Wang Yuan was saying, here the authorities not even calling out the mass shootings as racially motivated. It was enraging. She said, she's quoted as, "I was just so angry that I thought these police officers, and maybe all of America, just doesn't understand how racism and sexism intersects." And she also, credits that Black Lives Movement Matter, Black Lives Matter movement to really initiate this whole idea of racial discrimination and injustices reckoning in our country, which I think impacts a huge population in the United States. And as you know, demographics and population projections show that the multicultural population as an aggregate will be surpassing the Western European Caucasian descent population in a few years to come. So I think it really owes the government and all of us who have knowledge to how to improve our lives, always to really work together to make this, I guess, our population or our communities, our cultural existence in the United States a bit more, equitable, inclusive, and even more understanding the diversity that we're actually experiencing. So as Dr. Sterling also mentioned, there's a lot of increased violence, in particular with seniors. And it's not only in the United States, but even like in Canada, I think that many of the Asian seniors have been sharing some of their assaults. So even Canada is known to be much more tolerant. A lot of this anti-Asian hate has also permeated into the culture. And I would assume that is fueled by a lot of the rhetoric that many of our leaders were being spewed out there. So, and the sad thing is like these are seniors, the most vulnerable, kind of physically less strong individuals in our community are the ones who are being targeted by much younger individuals. With one of the most recent cases in San Francisco where this younger 20-some-year-old white male attacked this 73-year-old Chinese, Chinese descent elderly woman. And she actually was able to pick up a stick and also defend herself by hitting him back. And they were showing on TV that even while he was being hauled over into the ambulance, she also grabbed the stick and tried to pursue attacking him. And unfortunately, this is not just one incident, but we see that all throughout California, throughout the United States. And someone who, like myself, who's attuned to many of the Asian kind of news sources or advocacy groups, I see a lot of incidents happening in all the community really rising up to actually protest and also try to get the officials to be involved. But the question is like, what else is the police or is protection? Or what are some of the laws that are being changed to possibly even protect the communities, not just the Asian community, but all of them, and actually bring some more equitable justice to individuals. And the most recent post is for, there was like a GoFundMe effort to gain some funds for the treatment of this particular woman. And last week they raised like over $900,000, and she actually decided to give it back to the city to actually combat racism. And she also pointed out that She said that we must not submit to racism, and we must fight to the death if necessary. So something in regards to her standing up. What I saw yesterday, as a matter of fact, was another pop up on my social media feed. Is that in this particular picture on the right, you see one gentleman sitting with her, and she's sitting on her bunk bed, and I'm assuming that she lives in a single room occupancy. Oftentimes, senior Chinese elders in San Francisco are living by themselves, and often in these kind of hotel or dormitory like conditions where they only have one room, they share the bathrooms and the cooking facilities down the hall with everybody, and that's because they have limited income, or sometimes they don't have much support. The person who's actually sitting next to her, it's supervisor Matt Haney, and Matt Haney happens to be the son of a very well-known psychologist, Craig Haney, who has done a lot of research in incarceration and has spoken quite a bit in regards to torture. And his also affiliation is he was the lead graduate student during the Zimbardo prison experiments at Stanford. And again, my connections remotely with Matt Haney is like he's also the grandson of former Palo Alto University president Alan Calvin, so I also kind of have that connection with him. So there's some sort of psychology and social justice in his blood. So he's also been doing a lot of advocacy and a lot of changes within the government. But sometimes I figure that ideology sometimes it's actually combating common sense to do, to address many of the social ills that the city has been confronting. But at least, he's actually reaching out to his constituents. And he also, the district in which he served, there's been a lot of also physical assaults on some of the seniors there. So I just want to share that. And the fact that she, instead of taking the money by putting it out, makes a strong statement to a lot of individuals feeling that, she actually has a sense of something needs to be fixed, even at her old age, being as an immigrant from China. She also feels that that was not right and the wrong needs to be right. Rallies have been happening all across the country. People have been organizing many of the rallies, but one rally like maybe 3 weeks ago that really stood out was organized in San Mateo County, which is the county south of San Francisco. It was actually organized by Ashley So, a 13-year-old middle school girl who actually told her mom that this is not right. She wants to do something about it. So they were able to organize hundreds of people in San Mateo County to really go out and rally. And it was a very supportive community with a multicultural attendees coming. And a week or so later, there was another rally here in San Jose organized by Assemblyman Evan Lowe. And I was there to represent the Santa Clara County Psych Association. And looking around, I was the only person that I recognized being a psychologist. So I made sure I wore my psychology emblems for the association to remind folks that psychologists are also here to support the efforts. So I was able to run to her and get a picture before she ran off. But psychologists haven't just been protesting recently. And I think these are protests that at least the one on the left is from March or in Boston, where groups were getting together talking about, the Asians are not really the virus and that xenophobia should be addressed. And the picture on the right are business people in Chinatown in San Francisco protesting, saying, hey, you guys can come to help and sponsor our businesses because the lack of individuals coming to support has really impacted our livelihood. And most recently here in San Jose, Japantown, like in San Francisco and in other places like in Oakland, they've been organizing community support and also protection group or patrol groups ensure that seniors actually don't get assaulted. As a matter of fact, I wanted to share the picture from the Boston rally because I don't know if you guys recognize, but the first picture of the woman with the salt and pepper hair on the left-hand side, that's Dr. Mabel Lamb. She's a psychologist in Boston, quite involved. So when I saw her in this picture, I said, all right, their psychologist actually representing. I was just wondering whether she wore anything that resembled. I'm a psychologist and I'm here because I also believe, and I'm a member of the community. So I was encouraging it. I also try to bring students to participate, but oftentimes I know that there's other time pressures and demands on students' time as well as early career psychologists and also members of our organization. I think we also need to get more involved and be much more visible and be able to become resources to the policymakers, so that when they start thinking about bills to introduce or laws to be made or healthcare policies to be changed, that at least a psychologist's voice is actually there. We're very shy sometimes to sharing our opinions, but I've been encouraging a lot of our colleagues and students to really think about the power that and the knowledge that we have to help improve system, and we should not shy away from it. And I think we can all do that across. And of course, there were protests all over the country. And one of the things that Mayor London Breed was talking in San Francisco was, she hopes that this pandemic and the vaccinations will work so that there'll be more people on the street so that people might feel safe. But when I heard that statement from her or read it from her about the vaccine and tying it all together to the violence, I'm thinking, are you like mixing two things that it should be separated? It should be looked at, the vaccine is one thing and violence is something else. So I'm not even sure if individuals who are also from marginalized groups who are also fighting for social justice truly understand the impact on each of the particular ethnic groups or and what they are experiencing. But I think coalitions and working together, that's really help. Because then we can hear from other people's perspectives. My friend Pearl, she went to Korea. She's a filmmaker, and she also posted that even in Korea, they've actually been posting the public broadcasting systems history of Asian American in Korean, so that people from South Korea can really understand some of the history of discrimination that is being experienced by Asians here in the United States. And in this in particular, it's being done in South Korea, given that the shooting in Atlanta targeted a few Korean individuals too. And then this picture, actually, if I recall, is from the protest back in the early 90s, given rise in the LA riots as a result of the Rodney King beating from the LA police. The pictures show LAPD officers were white, and then they were beating up mercilessly. This black man was on the ground already, and to the point where he was actually damaged and hospitalized for serious injuries. And then that led to the riots for the injustices from the African American community, and because there were a lot of Korean businesses in the area, I think there was a huge conflict, racial conflict that arose from those two groups, where many of the South Korean immigrants, especially the men who have served in the military, ended up bringing their firearms, and a lot of them were semi-automatic. And those were the pictures that you're seeing. The Koreans were armed with semi-automatic weapons, and they're trying to threaten the Black community, who, because of all that riot and the chaos, a lot of looting happened, and a lot of the Korean business owners were afraid that their properties, their home, their safety was at stake. So the media pitted these two groups against each other. It took a long time to kind of resolve a lot of the tension. Media, I would say, is really powerful, and I think psychology should take more advantage of the media whenever possible, whether we have our own channels, our own programs, because a lot of the psychologists or the psychiatrists, mental health professionals we see on the media always end up doing something crazy, like sleeping with their clients or making stuff up. And I'm like, oh my God, there's good for artistic kind of range, but I think we should also bring the truth back that we don't sleep with our clients all the time. In regards to media, I'm most impressed with how Disney is able to impact a lot of the children's thinking. Back in the days, Herman Munster was saying, talking to his son, saying, the lesson I want you to learn is it doesn't matter what you look like. You can be tall, short, or fat, or thin, or ugly, or handsome like your father, or you can be black or yellow or white. It doesn't matter. What matters is the size of your heart and the strength of your character. Those are great principles in contrast to how media and Disney is actually being used today to really talk about social justice. Asian is not a virus with Mulan. Hispanics are not illegal with characters from many of the Disney movies. Black people are not threats. Muslims are not terrorists, and Native Americans are not savages. So I think the messages that we give to our children somehow actually gets kind of changed over time as they become adults, and it gets much more kind of not radicalized, but I guess more constricted. So this is where I bring it back to psychology, because as we all know, psychologists principle talk about what we need to do, what is aspirational for us to achieve. And one of the things that have been jumping out for me has always been the justice principle, as well as the respect for people's rights and dignity. And as many of you know, now APA has this task force that really trying to update the ethics code to actually make it much more relevant and actually much more, I guess, relevant to the times, and also have a psychologist take a much more active role in it. So I kind of teased out the social justice component of it, and this was out for public comments some time ago. And he also points out that psychologists are proactively engaged in ongoing efforts to advance equity and opportunity, privileges, and protection of all persons and peoples. They are committed to the reduction of various disparities that impact marginalized groups. It also calls for psychologists to use their knowledge, skills, experience, and influence to identify and counteract the underlying causes of and conditions of social injustices that are deleterious to the health and well-being of individuals, groups, and communities. I won't read the rest, you can read that, but it seems to me, at least when I read it, I was very happy to see that psychologists are trying to be more relevant, more assertive, and actually much more involved in some of the things that are really going on in our community. And personally, I would say that I do support that, and also do feel that we should get more involved and share our knowledge to make our communities and also the world that we live in much better. I also understand that we often are constricted by ensuring that here, there's some limitations to the knowledge that we have, but I think we need to do our part to be responsible professionals. And talking about politics, here's Representative Judy Chu from Los Angeles. And she, unfortunately, is one of only 2 psychologists in Congress. We used to have 3, now we only have 2. And the other one is Dr. Alan Lowenthal, both psychologists. And I remember doing a panel with Dr. Lowenthal 2 years ago at APA, when it's in San Francisco, or was it 3 years ago? He'll say, we need more psychologists in Congress to actually bring back civility. And when you actually look at and I've shared this in trainings, what is the educational background of our legislators, and what are the professional disciplines that they actually belong to? And consistently, the previous Congress under the Republicans and in the current Congress, which is primarily Democrat, 1/3 of the House and 1/3 of the Senate are attorneys. So no wonder they like arguing. And the 2 psychologists are in the House. So we need to get some psychologists in the Senate too. So I do know that we've focused a lot on the Asian American violence, but just this week, there's another kind of mass shooting in Colorado. And I think we can keep thinking and putting out position papers, but I really do believe that, thoughts and prayers are good, but really policy and change is really what's needed. So I encourage my colleagues and students to really think about getting much more actively involved in bringing our knowledge of psychological science and human behavior to help improve policies and laws. So that's kind of all I got, because that was actually a brief kind of talk, and then we'll go into discussion. So that's it, and this is myself with my affiliations and my contact information. I'll share with you guys and with Dr. Sterling, and she can definitely share. So these are nothing copyrighted. This is on the public sector, so it's been viewed by millions and millions of people already. So again, thank you very much, and then I'll stop sharing it so we can go back and see each other's faces.
Thank you so much. I'm still kind of holding some of what you have presented. Some of those pictures, Dr. Wong, make it so real. And some of the unfairness is always unfair. Violence against anybody is unfair, but the unfairness against some of those older women. And I loved the woman who fought back with the sticks, because we always have the image of the media gives us as Asian women not being active and not being assertive, and she was just not going to take it anymore, and I don't think any of us should take it anymore.
Yeah. Jorge, I was just going to say, I just wanted to jump in, because I almost started I think one of the things that got me was the man, the 74-year-old man with the bruises on his face. And, you know, so often showing the faces and the respect, you know, for naming the victims. And because so often they become just numbers. And I think we're so numb to numbers. It's so meaningless. So I'm so glad you showed those photos. And the fact that they're elderly is just tragic. And that they've been picked on as a particularly vulnerable group. So you really honored them by showing this. And I just really want to thank you for including all of that, and for your, also just very personally, for encouraging us psychologists to be out there in the community, going for advocacy, you know, change, and teaching your students, as you always do, to get active, to get involved, and to make our voices heard. So thanks so much for this. I hope a lot of students are really hearing this, and we'll take this to heart. Yeah.
I would also point out that I'm also very thankful for being invited, but I also have learned from many of you, especially those of you who've been in the field for a long time, published, and also giving us ideas as to how to bring our knowledge to really improve the systems or ways of caring for individuals. Like, you know, I remember reading many articles published by Dr. Walker. I'm thinking, and I was like, oh my God, I'm actually talking to her at this roundtable. So it's pretty humbling. And with Eileen, I've known her, and I was like, oh, at least I'm not in the same room, and she's gonna make me start moving and dancing this morning. but I do appreciate it.
Don't worry, we've already done Zoom dancing.
Can I take a moment and introduce some of the other people who've jumped on before we continue?
Absolutely.
So we promised, Jorge, that we'd have a wide representation. So we have our California contingent, Amy Lee and Ping Ho from both the Southern California area. We have Hattie, who did come in from London. We have Patricia, who joined us from Madrid. Dr. Valencia, I can't say your name.
Villavicencia.
Buenas tardes.
Hi, Jorge, encantada.
Mucho gusto.
How come you have a Spanish name, Jorge?
Did anyone care to guess?
No, but you know, I'm originally from Peru, and we have a Chinese community, very strong Chinese community in Peru, in Lima. And so there are many Wongs in Lima, and strong family. A very good friend of mine, Chinese descendant. She was Wong also. So it's really a pleasure to have heard your presentation. It's something that hurt our hearts to all of us. We all are Asian at these times. We should take a stand against human rights violations, of any kind. And it's true, when we work with trauma victims, we have this position. We cannot be neutral. We have to work for our patients' rights, and also for citizens' rights, and all over the world. So thanks so much for your presentation, Jorge.
Thank you again for listening.
And also Michaela, let's not forget Michaela.
Dr. Mendelson is from Boston.
From Boston.
Yeah.
So
thanks for dropping on.
People do jump on as they can come on. I wanted to say something, Jorge, that triggered me about your talk about psychology today. You know, I was on the board of directors of APA when we bought the journal. I was thrilled. I loved that journal. I thought it was so important that we addressed our knowledge in a way that helped all of humanity. And we had to lose it because we lost money. We couldn't do a magazine. Magazines necessitate advertisements, and we didn't accept advertisements from companies that we didn't think were healthy, like cigarettes smoking or alcohol. And as soon as we did that, we lost so much money that we even lost our building in Washington, D.C., and we had to sell it in order to survive our organization. For those of you who are younger, who did not know that history, it's very interesting. Advocacy costs a lot of money, and we have to really put advocacy money in our budgets and permit people. We don't encourage psychologists, and I think it's fabulous what you're doing with young psychologists to really encourage them to do that kind of advocacy, because we encourage them to write articles in journals, which are great, but only other psychologists read the journals. And so we really have to be out everywhere. So it's so important, your message, really.
Yeah, thank you. To respond to Dr. Villavicencio Carrillo, I was born in Cuba, so I'm Chinese descent from Cuba, so I do have that kind of balance. And I've worked with Spanish-speaking populations as well as Cantonese-speaking populations. So when I make appointments with Spanish-speaking folks, they're great, and then when they see me, they're always scratching their heads. And I remember one couple, the husband was looking at me for like 10 minutes, and I was like conducting my interview in Spanish. The mother was fine. The children just looking at me like, oh, there goes dad again, you know. And he's like, you speak Spanish really well. And I go, you too. And he goes, well, I'm Mexican. Go, okay. Where do you learn Spanish? I go, in Chinatown. And he just kept looking at me like, Chinatown? You know, in La Habana, in Cuba. So I kind of grew up in Chinatown. He's like, oh, okay. So anyway, so it was like amuses me to do that. But myself growing up also was a huge cultural identity crisis. You know, was I Chinese? Was I Cuban? And then when my family came to the United States, the whole idea of being an Asian American, it's like, well, you're not really an Asian American. You're like, you know, from overseas, and you're not Latino, you're not Cuban, you're not Chinese. So I learned to kind of live within the intersectionalities, all these boundaries, but not quite belonging. But it also allowed me to think very differently and not really always accept what was, you know, just said by the establishment. So that was my answer to how I got my name.
Very interesting.
And Jorge, you told me you didn't like Chinese food, I think, when you first came here, you found it strange.
It was strange. It was strange. I remember I shared with Eileen before that we arrived to San Francisco at night, and the next day my uncle and the family took us to dim sum, which is like Chinese tapas is being called. And the first day my sister and I went out, and we was like, oh my God, there's so many Chinese people around here. I've never seen that many Chinese people. So that's part of my history. But I think I want to go back to the advocacy piece. And many students always feel that, you know, politics is kind of dirty, or even my colleagues are saying, I don't want to pay money to influence folks. But that is how our system is operating, and that's how it works. So if we understand the games of the rules, why don't we play within those rules and actually bring our knowledge base to it? So many times people always keep hearing, oh, so-and-so donated multi-million dollars to this political campaign. And what I've also tried to do with students, like, you know, you can actually go to smaller events where psychologists like myself could buy tickets like to a local barbecue for a particular politician. And my only ask is that you show up, I need your body, just show up, eat some food, and take a picture and introduce yourself. Key thing, take a picture, eat food, and introduce yourself. And I think that also allows them to say, hey, I'm a psychology, or I'm a psychology student, I do this. And sometimes they'll remember. And if you all go in groups or with mentors or people who are their role models or professors or within the professional groups, I think people feel much more safe. So every time I do presentation, I remember I use the pictures that I've taken with students, and then it actually gives them the saying, oh, advocacies can be as simple as going to a barbecue, eating, and just taking a picture and introducing yourself. And I always tell them, if you can introduce yourself to a brand new client with very little information, what makes you think you can talk to a politician? They're just humans. They don't know who you are. They don't know what you do. They don't know what psychology is. You know all of that. And they're like, oh, that's true. So So that's kind
It's
of how
so
you
true.
introduce them.
You
Yeah.
know, we managed to get the mental health court. I don't know how many of you are aware of mental health courts, but these are courts for people who have mental illness to keep them out of jail and to help police know better how to handle them. So much of the violence gets spurred on by the ignorance amongst many police officers who are not well trained in dealing with people who have mental health issues. And Ted Strickland, who was a psychologist, is a psychologist, ran for Congress, and we worked with him very closely in getting funding. He funded, his bill funded the first 100 mental health courts across the country, and it was then picked up, and we had 400 courts, and now we have courts in every major city to keep the mentally ill out of jail wherever possible. So advocacy is critical for, not everybody's going to want to do it, but some people have to do it. And that means putting ourselves out there and standing there, just as you say, maybe with a bunch of friends or colleagues, but to go and to do. So anybody watching this, get out there.
We have trainings in California. CPA puts on lobby. We go to Sacramento. We were trained in how to approach the Congress people in Sacramento. So I don't know if other states do that,
Yeah,
but we actually have training days. Yeah.
Florida does it as well and takes groups of a lot of early career psychologists as well as students, young people, because politicians know they're going to vote a lot longer than somebody like me. I got a few more years, or hopefully many more, but not as many more years as somebody who's 20 in their 20s. And they may not have as much money as those of us who have been around for a while have, but the combination is perfect to be able to have the financial support, but also the bodies. So important, because everybody is a vote in democratic countries. Now, not every country, of course, that people who hop on here are democratic, but that doesn't mean that they can't be influenced by people. And by crowds of people, which is what protests are all about.
Yeah. I also want to say that many times psychologists, we tend to be a little bit more introverted, so we don't like getting out there. It's just calling it for what it is. And I also point out, advocacy can also be joining your professional organization, especially at the state level, because your practice, again, is governed by your state laws. And the fact that you join, whether it's a student or as a professional, you don't need to go out there and protest or show up. But just the fact that we have you as an additional numbers do count, because when, at least in California, we have all these other master level clinician and professionals, and they have a larger percentage of membership. So when they say we represent so many psychologists, and here's the percentage of our membership that belong to the organization, it allows the organization to have more influence or much more power to persuade or at least influence some of the legislators who may be voting on issues of our practice, and they have no clue of what mental health is, and they're voting on it. So our practice is governed by individuals who vote, who don't understand what we do. And therefore, if we don't belong to the organizations that advocate for us, it's really challenging for us to then say, well, we're not being included in particular policies or laws or payment schedules and things like that, because we just don't have anybody to advocate for us. So simplest thing is just join. And I know sometimes the organization's leaders make mistakes, but like in any organization, leaders who make mistakes, they get, they step off, new ones come in, and it's just part of the whole evolution process of how organizations go.
Brittany has her hand up. Go ahead, Brittany.
Hi, yes. So I wanted to echo something that both Dr. Wong and Dr. Walker said. I'm in the 4th year of my PsyD program, and I had class this morning, and my professor, actually, she's the director of my program, and she kind of pushed aside what we had planned for the day and allowed us space to really talk about this and talk about, as emerging psychologists, what is our role in social justice and advocacy. And so it really makes me like hopeful for the future of our field that people like me, when we're starting out, are being trained to think this way, and kind of starting out thinking about the different roles that we can have as psychologists. But one of the things that really stood out to me about your presentation was when you talked about how Asian Americans are being discussed, but they're not invited to be part of the conversation. And so one of my takeaway questions was thinking about like, how can I support my Asian American colleagues? How can I support my Asian American clients right now during this time? Like, what is it that they need? And so I'm really interested in hearing Dr. Wong, Amy, and Dr. Ho, your opinions on that question.
If Dr. Lee and Dr. Ho can go first, that'd be great because I've been yapping quite a bit.
Oh my goodness. So I'm actually not a doctor, so we'll start that. I've had a few friends just say to me, I just want you to know that, and some of them apologize for not speaking up sooner, that I just want you to know I'm in your corner and I'm thinking of you and wondering how you're doing. Even just, at least for me personally, as an Asian person, I've appreciated that. I am numb. I appreciated Dr. Wong using that word. When people ask me how I'm feeling, I actually, it just feels like such an onslaught this last year of this, that, and the other thing. It's just like one more thing. And I live in a little bubble. I'm not really going outside of my house. So it feels a little surreal. And I think something I wonder that I wanted to ask Dr. Wong about is does the data show that this has been going on for a long time and it's now just coming to light? Or is there actually a significant increase in targeting Asian Americans at this time? So, and I guess the PS here is that the underlying causes, I think anytime, I know the Jewish community experiences this a lot. Anytime there's a lack, a perceived lack in, or some people are not getting what they want in the way of their life, or they're not succeeding, or they're struggling, they always look for someone to blame. And that's a systemic problem that I think is possibly beyond the scope of our conversation. However, I'm at odds as to figure out how to deal with that. So,
Yeah.
Dr. Wong, I would love to hear from you.
I would say that discrimination, at least with the Asian American population, has been ongoing for a very long time. It comes and goes depending on what the population, the media is interested in. I think recently with the past administration calling it the Kung Fu virus or things like that, it's raised more attention. And then with the onset or the increase acuity of the violence, I think that has called it out more. But if you look across all the marginalized group, there's been a particular time when that group has been focused for a particular issue. But when you ask them, it's been going on for a long time. In history of the United States was built on this kind of a system, whether there's anti-Semitism issues, anti-Muslim, anti-Latinos. It's always been going on. It's just that the focus, and again, the American culture is very short-sighted, very oftentimes does something and then it's done, it's gone quick. And we know that many of the issues that dealing with people, it takes a long time, over years. So when you talk about Asian American hate, discrimination, they take it back to even back in the days when like the Chinese Exclusion Act, or even prior to that, Filipinos, even Japanese were not able to come in. So it's just that we don't talk about it. It's not taught in our classrooms because there's not that emphasis or that interest. And I think it bears fruit to bring out the history of how even psychology sometimes with this whole idea of evidence-based practices, I always argue that even like the article from Archer, I think it's 2005, is that what about the 95%? We're pumping out models and everything from, university first and second year students, and we're applying to this huge multicultural population that we work with. And sometimes like, how do we adapt evidence-based treatments to the communities and the language and for them to even understand when they don't even have the concept of what mental health services are, because I'm not crazy. So I think how do we do that? How we bring those voices? And I've always been the one person in ethics discussions like, well, but that doesn't quite apply. So I'm really glad, as I said before, that APA has taken like, I believe over 10 years now to start working on revising the ethics code to really be much more relevant and responsive to the community that we actually serve. So.
Well, just a tag note that I think one of the reasons the arts are so powerful is that we do have to start at the ground up with children in a sense of developing a sense of community and respect for others and empathy. If it doesn't happen then they're just going to grow up to become adults that have no empathy. So anyway, and I think the arts are incredibly powerful as a delivery mechanism for these social emotional learning, because just walking in and talking about it it's not an embodied experience that will stay with them.
Ping, do you want to say where your organization and your background in public health?
Oh my goodness.
Just to introduce a little bit to the rest of the group where you're coming from.
So my work is the nexus of the arts, mental health, and public health. And so I am very interested in the utilization of the arts as a delivery tool for community building, trauma reduction, self-awareness, team building, whatever needs, psychological needs there are, as an accessible and sustainable practice, rather than no access to care is a typical situation, or if people have access, there's a stigma of seeking psychological support. So with a sort of mass distribution of arts-based tools for this, it feels a little more organic, enables greater participation, and enables non-mental health professionals to play a role in changing perceptions of other cultures, for example, in communities.
It's so
So
important.
I
I just
was,
wanted to jump
very-
in for a moment to say that what we've learned from the research is that the Asian community in particular, I don't know whether it's also Chinese, from the Chinese, but certainly from Cambodian and some of the other Asian communities, feel PTSD in the body more than some of the psychological symptomatology. And I wanted to ask whether that is also happening now with the Asian violence across. I don't want to make the mistake of saying every Asian community is the same, because I know I don't see that. But I think what you're saying, Ping, is so important. If that is indeed true, that we're not going to see PTSD symptomatology as we might see it in other groups. We will see it more in the body and as the experience.
Yes, well, Eileen is the expert in this area, working with so many different populations and how they.
For sure.
I want to just say about Ping again. She's at UCLA, where I actually used to teach there too, and has really made inroads into the community, working with groups of children and drumming and all kinds of things that children, families, and community members will understand. So again, not just academic articles, but she's really gotten out there into the community in really impressive ways.
We're starting to run out of time, so let's take a look if anybody else has some things.
Amy's trying to speak. Yeah, up there in the corner.
Yeah, okay.
Who's also in Southern California, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, I'm like, it's like a complicated emotion right now. I was literally in tears a couple of days ago, sharing on Facebook and LinkedIn, like just the amount of violence, and watch some of their video where they out there really get pushed down, and the shooting, and it breaks my heart. And the one thing that I share is that I have this 2 years of really powerful training in communication where I literally understand words carries power. And so, one thing is like, from Dr. Wang's data, like clearly there was a spike in the last, since March 2020 to now, right? And so, our leader, which I hesitant to call a leader, use the word to say Wuhan virus, China virus, repeated over and over again. And I think that certainly, increased this Asian hate, right? During this, difficult time. And then when I was watching, there are a lot of photos from the protests, right? Like, this little kid holding up, the the signs say I'm not a virus, or like hate is virus, that's really kind of brought, to the point of like, being a leader, you have to be responsible, whatever the words coming out of your mouth, and recognize, the power of your words and the amount of impact. You're not just speaking in your own house, you're speaking to the public, your word carries power. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is, I'm a deep believer in the power of arts, both as, a mental, physical, neural health benefits. I started dance for healing after myself went back to my childhood love of music, dance, and art during my cancer, and personally benefit a lot from it. But also art as an advocacy tool is huge, right? And art as a community building tool, connecting humans together, like at the beginning of the pandemic, the Italian singing outside the window, people dancing on patio, connecting, right? And I think, when crises occur, in the society, that's when we go back to our soul, and our soul naturally had this unique way of connect with the arts. And I don't know, you guys remember that movie where, like, they were supposed to go into a fight, and then the parent, right, like, so I forgot what movie was it, started dancing. It was kind of funny, right? And then they end up become a dance off instead of fight. I forgot the title of the movie, but that's just an example. Use art as an advocacy, as a peace communication, as a way to build more empathy, resilience, community together. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's all I wanted to say. Yeah,
We have time for Eric. Thank you, Amy, Eric, and then maybe we need to stop soon, but go ahead.
As I think of it, there really, as was clearly said earlier, there are two parts. One is what can we do to prevent? That is, it's a school level. So how can we do more programs there? So I'm going to just leave that as a question. And the second is that once people have been traumatized, what can we do to treat? And I would, from my bias or understanding, at least there is still a lot of stigmata going to a psychologist in much of the culture. And especially in my limited experience with some Asian cultures, and they're all vary, I realize that. And what I have seen in the past is if psychology could relabel itself, it's like a body clinic or something, like body mind clinic. Don't call it psychology, and attached to eternal medicine, there's a much higher success rate. And I have also included that for people who do biofeedback. That's the world I live in. That if the clinic is attached to neurology or psychiatry, no patients want to show up. If the clinic is attached to internal medicine in a hospital, there's no problem at all. And so I think we do the same things, but I think the labeling, it's like almost saying, maybe, I should label myself differently, not a psychologist per se, even though it's what we all would do, or you would, but to really give it a different label that may make the door more open in my limited experience to some populations.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lenore, do we have time for anyone who has not spoken before we end?
I think if anybody who has not spoken want to jump in, absolutely.
Giselle and Hattie.
I really enjoyed the presentation, and it was pretty interesting just talking about Dr. Wan's trajectory from Cuba and being in Cuba and Chinatown, and obviously all this history in regards to, I feel like it was not as talked about, but definitely that the discrimination has always been there. It's just now being more relevant and talked about. And being from my family being from Colombia, we're actually having a huge influx of Chinese individuals coming in to help out with some construction. So we in Colombia, in Bogota, will be creating a new Chinatown. So it's interesting, yeah, because we have individuals from all over Asia, but now we're seeing a huge concentration, at least of Chinese coming to the country to help out. And they're like, and I know that they really talked about, you know what, we're becoming a true city now, because we're having this population here and we're going to embrace them. So it was a really nice gesture in regards to hearing the president and the vice president of Colombia discussing, what this means to our community and how much we can open up to the rest of the world.
Thank you so much. And maybe a report from London. Hattie, what's going on there?
Oh yeah, thank you very much for the talk.
He had to leave.
You had to jump in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I just want to say
now,
that,
though.
What I found personally interesting, I mean, I found lots of it interesting, but the idea that whatever your profession is, you can still, you know, you can still become part of advocacy by, so like you were saying, Ping, about the children being if you can get the children to understand empathy and to understand others, then that's something that they'll grow up with. So yeah, many things are interesting, but that's something that I do believe that we can all in some way have an effect on the systems if we go to the right places. So
Great, thank you. I think we probably
I think we have come, yes, I think we certainly have. Thank you,
yeah.
Eileen, for putting this together and inviting Jorge. What a
Yes.
wonderful experience that we've had. I want
Do we
to
have
invite,
time, Sec? Maybe we can, some who didn't know, for example, just now that he has left, maybe to put their comments in the chat. A thank you, whatever it is, just a moment so we can send it to him.
Yes.
that sounds like a great idea. For anybody who wants to add, we'll probably post the chat as well. I think we've been doing that on Facebook. So those of you who are watching this, please add your comments, your ideas, your thoughts about what to do. This problem is not going to go away. We need to continue our advocacy, and we need to really be supportive of our Asian friends and make new friends, so that the community is not feeling alone, that they feel that they do have the support of other people who are intersections. I mean, I love Chinese food, and my father worked in Chinatown for a lot of my childhood and was were very much involved with the Chinese culture during my growing up years. And so for me, I feel like I'm part of the Asian community in a way as well. I think it's important for those of us who have the strength and the ability and the visibility. Some of you who are watching this have visibility as well. Make yourself known and make your feelings known, so that we can support the community when it's under fire right now, and correct the misinformation that has been put out, that has, I think, been very much involved in the uptick of crimes. We got to support hate with love. And I think that's a good way to end. Next week, we'll see you again, 12 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time.
Same channel.
Thank you so much for bringing Dr. Wong, Eileen. Wonderful.
You're welcome. I'm so glad. I'll thank him again on behalf of all of us.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
See you. See you. Bye-bye.